So many people talk about grounding. It means something different for different people. Some people, it means walking on the grass barefoot. That's a great way to ground, but that's more of an electrical grounding and connecting to the earth's energy. You're getting electrical currents and you're stabilizing the electricity in your body and discharging. Very nourishing. Totally do it, but doesn't mean you're grounded if you do that. I can see they're not grounded. Some people, they just put roots in and they're just going a few inches deep or a few feet deep. True grounding, if your soul mission and your light is here to be really bright, your grounding needs to be into the center of the earth. Otherwise, you will be thrown off because the unseen forces, one small gust of wind, we need to be unshakable in our embodiment. That is another level of grounding that most schools don't teach. I see it over and over again and wherever I go, or people skip through it when they're leading a practice or they're about to do something. And the energies on the planet right now are so huge, and the grounding needs to be huge into the center.
Welcome everyone to season 2. And I'm so excited to start this season with a dear friend and soul sister, Aeon Karris. She is a master mystic, a leadership consultant, a speaker, and an author of a book called The Synchronicity. I've been reading it, and there's so many things that Aeon and I can talk about. I highly recommend for everyone to get it, dive deeper into various mystical topics, but also a very practical way of Aeon explaining synchronicity and beyond. So welcome, sister, to this podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You and I just recently went to the Metropolitan Museum, the ancient Egypt section. After that, we went to the obelisk and we got to feel the energies of the ancient times. And obviously, you and I have past lives as priestesses. We've done this before, not once, and we just remembering what it all means and how we can apply it. So, what really made you write this book? I would love to hear more about the synchronicity method itself. So, anything you can share with listeners on your journey and the book itself?
Thanks. I wrote the book in 2015, right after my house burned down in a devastating fire. It was a community space in Oakland, and there were 6 of us living in this like triplex, and we ran it. It was called the Lake House Temple, and it was one of these freak accidents. It happened in the middle of the night. I was the only one awake. We got out minutes before it went into flames, and I had to wake people up and get them out of the house. Otherwise, if I had been asleep, I think we would have lost lives that night. And so it really shook me to my core, because not only did I lose everything I owned, it was my place of work. I used to run workshops there. My computer, my office, everything was gone overnight. And I had, ironically, the night of the fire, but the 3 days before the fire, and maybe weeks before the fire, I was really unhappy with living there. I felt like I needed to move. I had only been living there for about a year, almost a year to the day. I felt this itchy, that they call it itchy feet for travelers. I can't stay here any longer. But I was really needing to rebuild my life because I had just arrived. I had been living in India for 8 years prior, and I had just come back to the US, but I'd been living off grid, and being in the city again was just not good for my nervous system. So the actual day of the fire, I wasn't asleep because I was feeling all this electricity in the air. It felt very unnerving. I was having anxiety. I felt very uncomfortable. What am I doing here? I was shopping for a new bed, for new bedroom furniture, because I was like, it's just not comfortable. Like Goldilocks and the Three Bears or something. Putting a bid on a new bedroom set when I heard this explosion and realized that, oh my gosh, our house is on fire. And anyway, when the house was burning, there was all these synchronicities that happened. Like I had tried on a shirt I had purchased a few weeks before the fire, and I don't even know why I bought it. It was totally not my style. Even when I put it on, it was uncomfortable. But there I was out front of the fire, and it was the only thing left that I owned. It was the only piece of clothing because everything was burning. And when I looked down at the shirt, it was a picture of a house with wings, and it was a red house. And there was all these meanings, and you can read more about it. I want to spoil the whole book, like a big part of the story of the book, but there were just so many synchronicities that I absolutely knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was being guided. This was like a course correction, and life was happening for me. And while I watched the fire, I felt elated. I had this ecstatic feeling, like it was opposite of what I should have been. I felt like I should be crying or I should be like in panic, but instead I was feeling like I had wings and I was being carried. And now the reality of the situation was I hardly had any money in the bank at all. I had just rebuilt my business after leaving India, where I was really successful and had a big community there. And it was like another massive restart, rebirth, phoenix moment.
Phoenix moment. Yes. My listeners are familiar with the phoenix because I mention it a lot. Yes.
Yeah. So I was having a phoenix
Yeah.
moment, and I just knew, okay, Spirit, where is this taking me? A good friend of mine, she's on This Isn't Like You. You don't need to be stuck. Like, you always reinvent yourself. What do you really want? And her asking me that in that moment, suddenly I just knew I just want to be in the woods, deep in the woods. I want time to write a book. I want to finish this book I've been working on. And her husband happened to be listening from the other room, and he pops in. I have a cabin in the woods you can stay in. And so I went to the cabin in the woods. I lived there for 9 months, and that's where I wrote the book. And this is my fourth edition. There's a story and a lot of synchronicities to why I'm on the fourth edition. I've been teaching it in my mystery school for the last 10 years now. But the main point is about the synchronicity method. I've been a spiritual guide and healer for over 20 years. And one thing was sticking out was that everybody always wants to tell me about synchronicities, and they're always getting their mind blown. And I realized that was a common theme of like people calling me with these wow moments. Synchronicities can often feel paranormal or blend into past life memory or communicating with the departed soul or these deja vu feelings
Right.
or telepathic feelings. And so they merge into the parapsychology world. Synchronicity, I feel, is really the bridge for us to recognize, no matter what religion, what background, what culture we're from, that we are spiritual and we have a spiritual body, and we're so much more than this human form. And I think synchronicity gives us those moments where we feel that unseen hand, like orchestrating our life. Sometimes people have synchronicities in a divine order, like golden doorways are opening for them just when they need it. I decided to focus on synchronicity because it's a common theme that anyone can connect to, because we have so much religious dogma and there's so much trauma, I think, from religious and spiritual groups. We've been let down by a lot of our spiritual leaders. We've got the Catholic priests who've misbehaved, the gurus who've misbehaved, the church leaders, the cults. And so people in our generation tend to have a spiritual crisis because we've been disconnected. I think synchronicity is that way in which the divine speaks to us in a more neutral way. And now with quantum physics and all of this new science, we have a new language for something that before was just left for the mystics and the yogis and the occultists, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring in the quantum aspect of it because that is one of my focuses. I'm curious as you explain synchronicity for those, like we were just having a conversation a little earlier. I was trying to explain to my Russian speaking mom synchronicity in Russian, and I was having a hard time. If you were to explain synchronicity maybe from quantum perspective, like deja vu, for instance, right? My understanding is when two waves collapsing in a moment, we kind of experience in that. There is like this particle and waves matter. That's why we feel it the way we do viscerally in our bodies. There's this deeper knowing that we're on the right track. How would you explain from your perspective?
Yeah, I think string theory or quantum entanglement can explain synchronicity in a way. But for me, synchronicity is a wave, like a time code. It's an energetic frequency that when we're in peak flow states, we find that wave more easily. I think also for me, I have a lot of synchronicity around trauma, around traumatic events, difficult events where, like the fire, where I'm feeling overwhelmed, my senses are overwhelmed because there's an actual literal situation happening where my life is in danger. And then it's as if by magic, like boom, all these opportunities, doorways, chance of luck, whatever that is, that open up. And those kind of synchronicities, I can really feel like I've entered into another realm of existence where I'm no longer of the mind, I'm just being. And when we're in a state of beingness, we really enter into that frequency where we see that we're connected to everything else. And life is constantly, everything is speaking to us, the stars, the moon, the sky, the clouds, the animals. Everything's happening in this grand orchestration, like a harmonic. I see synchronicity more as sound and frequency and nonlinear time. It's a vibration that I get into, and I just know synchronicity is going to take me. When I set my intention, when I set my energetic fields, when I'm clear about where I am and who I'm being and what I'm emanating, then as I move through the world, it's like a magic carpet ride. Synchronicity is this wonderful adventure, and you can ride these waves, and you don't need to be in the mind anymore. You don't need to be like trying to figure it out with your analytical mind, trying to strategize all the time. I find it much more enjoyable, like a dance, like flow, like movement, like water, where we set our frequency to that. This going into my method of how to get into peak flow states and how to really set your frequency so that you can experience life as a grand adventure, as a magical ride. And really you set the course by the kind of feelings and sensations you want to experience more than what you want to necessarily achieve or acquire. It's not about where you're going, but the experience you want to have while you're doing it. So, for example, if I'm in Brooklyn right now and if I want to get to Manhattan, I can chart a course and focus on the timing of the subway or the car or whatever, or I can walk out the door and allow myself, with the intention that I'm going to get there, to go on a beautiful journey and just let it know that I'm going to be there and let the journey unfold. And that's when really incredible things, like, it's so much more magical than our analytical minds will think through it, right? Because we're thinking about the destination rather
Yeah.
than, oh, this beautiful adventure and who you're going to meet on your journey. That person you meet might just change your life, right?
Yeah, I love that. So it feels like there's a difference between synchronicity and manifestation, because manifestation can also work in the way that we set our intention, but it's very goal oriented. Like we want to actually create something specific, versus here, it's more like going on the hero's journey, right? Like you said, whatever adventure is awaiting is perfect because at the end, there is a learning there, and it's just all pieces together the way it needs to, and you just have to surrender to the journey itself.
Yeah. And my method and what I feel is most fulfilling for me is being in present time. Otherwise, I feel I'm missing life. I'm missing these moments, like luxuriating in the moment. So much of the Western world, and now the whole world, it's based on commerce and this kind of 9 to 5, which ends up being like 9 to 9, right? Or whatever, 8 to 10 or 12. Like, it just never ends. It seems like everybody is on this wheel of hustle culture. And that's basically where I started. I was in tech in the 90s, And I was so burnt out by 2000. I started eco communities. I left tech in 2003, and that was a big leap of faith. But I just couldn't. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to turn into a cyborg. This is so unhealthy. I was young and my body was breaking down, and I just couldn't sustain the rate. And there was no stopping. And all my colleagues, they're still doing it into their 50s. And I was like, sorry, my body can't do that. Like, I can't physically work like that. And so I had to find another way. And so I went all over the world. I ended up living in India for 8 years. That's a whole other synchronistic story. I found myself on this adventure of a lifetime that I would never have planned, right? If you told me in the 90s that I would go and live in India for 8 years, I would have laughed so hard. No, that country is not for me. Definitely not going to go there. And I loved it there.
Yeah, India has been always on my maybe later, just because it's just so different. And I admire that you were able to have that experience. I know you have a lot of stories, what you were trying to do there and being like an outsider with a culture that has caste system. Every experience teaches us something deeper about ourselves or gave you all the information you needed for the book. So maybe we can dive a little deeper into the method itself. So if someone wants to go on this journey, what are like the prerequisites? I know you have really nice framework for it, and I think it's super helpful to have a framework to be that rider on the wave, right? Surfing. How do we learn how to surf in the best possible way?
What happened to me 20 years ago, what made me find this method and teach it. My father died in 2003, and his sort of sudden illness and death is what made me stop working so hard and made me leave tech. He was also a workaholic and an entrepreneur. And even on his deathbed, he was like signing contracts and stuff. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. Like, he's clearly killing himself working
Mm.
this hard. And I was just like him. And watching him go through that, it was shaking something in me. Like, I literally walked away from, I had two companies at that time, and I just walked away, gave them to my partners. They thought I was crazy. What's wrong with you? And I just don't care about money anymore. Suddenly, connection and family and lifestyle became way more important. The quality of my life became more important. But when I watched my father leave his body, I actually saw him leave his body. I saw some jellyfish like thing, which was his spirit, move out the back of his head and up into the ceiling and through the roof. I was in awe. Whoa, I just saw the color in his body changed from like a normal flesh tone to a gray tone as this jellyfish thing moved out. And I was in so much awe. Just as his spirit went through the roof, these three golden packages came down and entered into my chest. And from that moment on, all of my siddhis opened, and I became clairaudient, clairsentient, clairvoyant. I was having massive Kundalini awakenings, and it turned into 9 years of shamanic initiations that I was already working with teachers and spiritual teachers, but I wasn't thinking I would ever, I never wanted these abilities. I had some psychic ability, and I had a lot of past life recall, and I had all these paranormal things happening to me, a lot of ET connections since I was a child, but I didn't speak publicly about it. And it was informing my work in tech and things like that. But I was studying with these teachers for my own healing, for alternative therapies, because I knew Western medicine wasn't really for me and didn't get to the root cause of what I was dealing with. And so I had been working with these shamans. And when my father died, I didn't have any idea. I was not prepared for that kind of an awakening. And as I went from teacher to teacher, I kept seeking more teachers, because what I was seeing and experiencing was really quite terrifying, honestly. The realms were all open very quickly. It was very difficult for me to live in the city. I was in San Francisco when it happened, and I ended up moving up into the redwoods, and I didn't touch anyone or connect with anyone for a number of years, except my partner and then husband. But even him, I wouldn't sleep with him. We never had sex. Like I was in a state of tuning all my senses and purifying my body. And it just continued on and on. And I went to all these different mystery schools, masters, asking them for guidance because I was seeing things that were quite disturbing. I knew I wasn't crazy because everything I saw, I could validate in some way. And it was just way too crystal clear. And not only was my father and my spiritual teacher, who died ironically or synchronistically, my dad and my spiritual teacher, they died a few weeks apart from each other. So they both started communicating to me from the other side, along with all my other deceased ancestors. And it was a lot of information to process. In all these mystery schools, they teach all the different spiritual arts. Nobody could meet me where I was at. I learned things, but most schools have you read from like your third eye, your crown, and above. So when you're doing like astral travel, or when you're even just doing psychic readings on people, you're in your higher chakras. And what I found when people do that, and when I did that, it would leave my body open for other entities and energies to come near. So, especially trance medium channeling was leaving the body so open. And I felt like it was creating so much distortion in the body. One of my teachers was a trance channeler, amazing person. But I must have taken him to the emergency like 3 or 4 times as his apprentice after doing like 20 readings. He would be so physically ill, and I could see clearly what was happening because my vision was on. Nobody wanted to talk about that. It really upset a lot of shamans. Then I started finding higher and higher levels of adepts who, when they saw my skill set, were just challenging me. And these challenges were not fun. They would put me on edge. And I just thought, oh my God, this is psychotic. Like the world is crazy and there's so many layers and dimensions.
Do you think they challenge you because of their spiritual ego? They were threatened by the fact that you might know more than they do, or have a essentially higher perspective?
Yeah. And like a test, I felt like they wanted to see my skills. And for me, that was so shocking because I was coming like this wounded girl whose dad had died and needing a teacher and needing protection, needing someone to take me under their wing and help me fly in those realms. Instead, they were challenging me to the nth degree, and I had to play. Like there was no ignoring it. Once they knew I was online, and mind you, it wasn't just my teachers, it was all kinds of entities, beings, people. I would walk, especially in India. I ended up becoming business partners with some very top spiritual gurus who ended up putting me on stage and getting me to share, which that was never in a million years something I ever wanted to do. But I did it because I realized there's a lot of mind control and misuse of power on the planet that really is distorting reality and stealing people's power and their sovereignty. I'm on a mission to liberate people and to create this like liberation army around the world. I want to share, hey, we are sovereign beings. Actually, we don't need to be enslaved in these programs. We can drop these shackles and chains and fear programs that they've been force feeding down our throats for thousands of years. We actually have the power within us in our biology to awaken to a totally new level of human potential, this very mundane, dumbed down reality. The shared reality is at this base level that is dumb when you've awakened to all these other dimensions, right? Why I lived in isolation and then remote for almost a decade was because everyone was so incongruent. So I would speak to someone and here I could see like their field, I could see what the shape of their field. Most people, I realized, have a ton of trauma and weird programs running. They have entities in them. They have disease in them. And I could see all of that and their ancestors. And then I'd be like, are you okay? And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. If I spoke to, I'm like, oh, your grandmother wants you to know this. And then they just start crying, or they would start shaking in my presence. And I was like, oh my God, this is not good. I don't want to do this. But I didn't know how to control my senses. So they were just open. I couldn't be in the world without seeing and feeling and knowing all that was happening in someone's reality. And so while some people think, oh, that would be so fun and so amazing, it really wasn't. It was a huge burden to hold. And more than that, it created like a deep depression of, whoa, we are really messed up. How are we going to fix this? How do we get beyond this? And is this just where we're at? If you wake up from the matrix, I'm like, there's no one to play with, right? Like, and there's no going,
You can't
right?
go back. And I feel like it's happening right now with so many people are coming online so much quicker. And maybe they don't just more supportive, but still, like I have some clients and friends who are still having a hard time recalibrating. There is this aspect of the hardware that this body is just not ready to process as quickly as maybe all the information quantumly that's being bombarded on us. One of your first pieces of the framework is about framing the geometry. And I strongly resonate with that because that was a real situation just even this Friday where I was helping a client with recalibrating some energies from her trip in Europe. And it was just in some beautiful megalithic sites, but it was just too much information. There was no geometry there to hold and contain it. Yeah, let's talk a little more about the geometry, why geometry is so important in this process.
Yeah, and that's what I started noticing, is that we have a biofield around our body, and it's developing since we're a kid. Like every 6, 7 years, we get a new layer. And when we have trauma up until 35, that's the last sort of final layer that gets built in. And then beyond that, we can, if we're aware and conscious enough, we can expand and contract, and we can organize our biofield with our intention. But when we have trauma in these developmental stages, it creates these huge holes and vacuums, which collapse the field so it doesn't form properly. And what I noticed, most of us have a trauma at each level of those developmental fields. And I come from a really, let's call it a dysfunctional family unit or whatever. Bless my family. But there was a lot of trauma growing up, a lot of trauma inside the family, outside in our community, in the culture. And so all of those stacked issues create all these different holes. We look like a target, basically, with these, like a bullseye with these rings, and these black holes open. And then when we come in contact with, like you and I are coming in contact, whatever black hole that we have in our system that is a negative program, depleted, it's deconstructed, it's not in its perfected shape, it has a hole or a dent, or it's just torn, then our negative programs can easily pass between each other. That's why misery loves company. It's familiar, and yet we can really go downhill if we're with people who have the same trauma as us. We can spin into this dark abyss, right? And that's why genocide and these cultural traumas are so heavy. These generational traumas, like collective traumas, those are deeper. We have generational traumas from our ancestors, like if they went through World War I, World War II, or anything that our family experienced before us, it lives in our cells. And so that's part of our biofield as well. And until we heal it and recorrect it, we have these holes or indentations in our field that then exchange energy with the world around us. Also, if you've healed a lot of your generational trauma and childhood issues and activated your sovereignty, we can share positively keys too. So when I get into the Synchronicity Method and I'm
Mhm.
holding my frequency at a certain level, anyone who interacts with me gets a gift of that key. That's why the consciousness is raising on the planet, because there's many of us light workers out here like us and all those listening who are doing the work, right? We're healing, we're recalibrating, we're remembering
Right.
our divine inheritance. We're remembering we're way more than the physical body. We're way more than these fear based structures. And when we remember our divinity and our God spark awakens from within us, a lot of things come online. The more we do it, the more we resonate together, the more we create our own internal harmony, it just ripples out to our entire soul group, the monad, each other, the collective consciousness. We can see now so many people are doing the work because the zeitgeist is shifting. And then we have the pulsations from the sun, which are helping different star systems. But the geometry is our, not only our biofields, but it informs our physicality. When we're sick, that sickness or dis-ease comes in through the biofield first
Mhm.
as energy. Then it goes into the deeper layers of the field before it lands in the body as physical symptom or issue. We can rewrite at that level and correct it as energy as well. When it's already densified in the body, like as cancer or some debilitating disease, of course, it can take longer to relieve, but it's the same codes and energy work. It's just you have to raise your frequency that much higher to eject it from the field. But the biofield and the geometry around your field is so much more important. And for whatever reason, every mystery school I went to, they talk about the aura, but they don't talk about owning your biofield and that it is mothership. If you're
Sure.
not in the center of your ship, I can tell you someone else, something else is driving it.
We'll use it.
Yes. And
Yes.
it's like leaving an empty seat at the cockpit, and
Mhm.
anyone who's talented enough to drive it, it's very tempting. My main focus has just been this gap I found from all these schools I went to, all these teachers, all these philosophies, all these occultists. And I realized, oh, they're not telling you because there's also a dark agenda that's using the fact that you don't know that against you, getting you to sign things, give away your liberty, give away your
Sovereignty.
sovereignty constantly in these sneaky ways because you don't even realize you're doing it. So even in relationships, like someone's codependent or feeding off your energy and you think it's love. That's how confused we are. And that's how sneaky the program is. So knowing your biofield, taking back the container ship, the geometry, it'll cure and heal almost anything.
It's so interesting you say that because I had experiences with dealing with someone in authority figure who is a narcissist this last 3-4 months. And I went deeper into trying to understand narcissism as a collective trauma of the victim victimizer, as well as a galactic trauma. Because when I started tracing back, I saw that you and I, Lyran sisters, like it really goes back to the Lyran Wars. It goes back to where AI and other mind control systems that you mentioned started to be used to manipulate across the galaxy, other species, and we carried that program in different incarnations as well. We also have a genome full of that programming. So that takes a lot of self-awareness and listening to this conversation, understanding that this trauma is not just from this lifetime. It's much more than that, and it's much more complex. I do few modalities. One of them is called Crystalline Soul Healing. It's actually a Lyran modality that I learned from Jamie Price. It was given to her by the Lyran Council, and it's actually a template that runs on the field and clears all of these cords and all of these programs. Like literally, when I activate it with my clients, it's a hologram, it's a template, it runs code like in a matrix. And that's sometimes what needs to happen because it's so deep and so vast, and the person's soul wouldn't be able to capture it. So it has to be this more like intuitive antidote program to clear the field. Sometimes those blocks that you're mentioning in the field, they sit so far out. I find them like sometimes few stretches, it's not even more than 6 feet, where the ancestral stuff is sitting, or
Mm.
these knots of energy and more. And the whole geometry, like you said, distorted, incoherence, like the instrument is not playing correctly. When I try to explain what I'm doing, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm recalibrating you, but really I'm tuning your geometry, I'm tuning your instrument because it can't even perform as well because of all these things that within the field. I really resonate with what you're saying because that's my personal experience and the work that I do as well.
You really get it. And I love that you've understood and been able to upgrade your geometry as you travel quite far. It's interesting. So I wrote the book because I was angry in the sense that even spiritual leaders and healers and those who are in the arts, they're not holding their frequency correctly. They don't frame their geometry and they're not grounded properly. Especially, there's so much spontaneous Kundalini awakenings right now. There's all these modalities. Like with the internet came all the secrets unveiled, right? All the deep occult mysteries that
Yeah.
you used to have to learn orally and through initiation and through tutelage. Now they're just online. So you don't even need a teacher. I actually started studying occult science by really old print books when I was like 17, 18 years old, going to these occult bookstores and like playing with magic. I had no idea how real it was. There's like a fascination, or there's like things that happen to you and you need explanation, and you go where you can find answers. These aren't things that most friends talk about or families talk about. If you do, you're really lucky and bless them up. But I grew up in a born again Christian household. Past life doesn't exist. Ghosts don't exist. Anything outside Jesus Christ is satanic, right? So it was like I was having this huge rainbow of experiences that
Mm.
were outside biblical norms. And I actually got kicked out of the church really young just for asking questions.
Mm.
Like just asking the question. I didn't even share what was happening to me. I knew not to. I knew I needed to safeguard my relationship with spirit because it was crystal clear for me. I'm really lucky, actually. My mother was such a religious fanatic in the sense that I went to a private school until I was in high school. 14 years old was the first time I met anyone who was not a born again Christian. So, all those years, 0 to 14, I was indoctrinated, basically in a cult. And then I realized, wow, I don't even believe this. Like the moment I got outside and all those things I was questioning, that they were getting, like calling me a disruptor, saying I was rebellious. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm actually just curious. Where's the dinosaurs in the Bible? Like things like that, that were just so innocent. Asking questions wasn't allowed because it's poking holes in their authority and the way that they've controlled you. And I realized that I am not controllable like that. I have this incorruptible spirit that many people have tried to control. And there's an ancient soul inside me that knows the truth and has access to truth. And I'm glad I've always had that connection, direct connection. But man, I needed to fight for it. And I went to so many people, and it was like abuse after abuse, or challenge and challenge, initiation after initiation, to the point where it was after I meditated 8 hours a day for 5 years straight. It was basically all I could do to just survive the reality that I was existing in and all the dimensions I was playing in, and stay sane and just keep everything moving. But then I came out of that a master and a teacher. And suddenly everyone who sat with me was having Kundalini awakening. Suddenly what happened to me was then happening to anyone who came near me. And so I was seeing like, oh, wait, this is, and then I stepped into this role of teacher and realizing, oh, wow, there are specific stages of initiation, of deconstruction and rebuilding,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing how to use our geometry. Our human biology is so magnificent and so ancient and otherworldly, and we are otherworldly. We know that. I'm sure everyone listening to that knows that. But you can't, people say, where are you from? And you say, I'm Lyran, I'm Pleiadian, I'm wherever. Like that's not in our vocabulary at the moment as like common.
Yeah, I think
Yet, but you're
I think we're moving fast. I
we
think
are.
there will be a world where it will be in the vocabulary. I think it's
It's
starting to
exciting.
become one. You're right. It is us, the ancient souls, who are uncorruptible. I feel like I have that same not corrupt
You can
encryption.
try. You can try to kill us. We just get stronger with each.
No, and I think also because of our past lives where we held these important roles as high priestesses and priests, and we've done it several times. I know you have as a Mayan, I have too, and Chem and Atlantis. And this is just on Earth, not to mention beyond Earth. So I
Right.
think we went through rigorous training to hold that truth and go through lifetimes where maybe we didn't remember, but when we were waking up, we knew better. And I think that's the light we shine in at this times where I talk about it as a distortion meter. What's your distortion meter? You really have to listen to the resonance. If your body, your inner knowing is telling you something is off here, it probably is. It probably is. So really learning how to listen and trust that inner voice, inner knowing your higher self is so important. This is what this podcast is all about and how it started. It was on Clubhouse actually. During COVID, I started a group, soul communication, because I couldn't call it light language. It was about light language and activating people's light language. But at the time, I looked around, not everyone was ready to do that yet. And so I had to hide it under a more acceptable name, soul communication. And then people come into the room and I start holding a container to activate others and remember their gifts until beginning of the year. Someone was like, I think we're ready to come out of the container and I think you should start doing a podcast. Where we are today, you're right. I think the mystical knowledge that we carry from these lifetimes is sacred. And in some ways, because it opened up so quickly, we did lose that container. And it's all for grabs. It's all for up for distortion as well. We went through these secret societies and the Essenes and all of these groups because there was a lineage there. There was holding hands through the process and learning from each other, passing the light codes and these codes from women's line through generations. That was how we did it in the very sacred container. And I think right now many are confused. They going after many things at once. And it's not necessarily bad. Curiosity is wonderful, but you really have to sift through misinformation.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to what you said about going with your inner truth. What I found is that because of the distortion and because of the traumas that we carry, most people can't discern their own voice. I know for myself, when I was going in through the initiations and how I found the synchronicity method, it was by accident, but it started to get confusing. Which is the real me?
Mm.
Especially when I was accessing so many higher planes of existence and so many guides and masters, and I could speak to anybody. And then it was like, wait, sometimes they take you on a wild ride if you actually start responding and doing everything you hear. Let's take trance channeling, for example. One of my teachers, a master mystic, he trance channeled a specific entity. And this entity was amazing. She knew so many things. But there was a point after 6, 7 months that I was like questioning her. And because I had all this pantheon of beings that were communicating to me. And I started to see them fight amongst themselves and them try to give me different advice. And then my father would pop in from the other side and my teacher. And then I started seeing, whoa, they're in all these different dimensions. And then I was like, I don't know who to hear. I don't want to follow you. Where am I in all of this? And so when I would open doing that kind of techniques I learned in those schools, it would get worse. I said, no, I have to be guided by myself, not an entity outside of me. God lives inside me. So I need to access the source through my own divinity, not through anything outside myself, because then I've then put a projection, or there is a projection and it's distorted. So getting to that was how basically I turned inside out. I saw myself become the source as sun, as this shining being, as this bliss ball that I call it. So when I activated like that, then I realized, oh, now I can hear myself crystal clear. But it's only through the heart that you merge all dimensions into one present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that embodiment of soul is critical, one, for our healing and our well-being, two, for understanding who we are and what we're here to do, and really remember our soul mission. And then once we have established home in physical form, because most of our souls are like floating up and behind us, right? Like I can see it when I look at people. So sometimes I'm looking above them and talking to them. It's really fascinating. Or it's like just behind them to the side, and I'm like looking like that, and they're thinking like, what are you looking at? I'm like, I'm sorry. And I had to stop and train myself, just respond to their mouth, which was really hard, right? Because it was totally incongruent. And it made it dangerous for me to be around people that were incongruent, until I learned that I could keep, like, for me to be in New York City right now and thriving, enjoying it, loving being out in the city amongst people is such a huge healing from 20 years ago when all my gifts opened and I was so empathic. I could hear and see everything. My whole field would get all twisted up and I would be in bed for days afterwards. Whoa, everything is hooked into me and I can still hear and see and experience everybody's everything. And until I learned to seal it off and really sit in the center of my being, that was the only time I really understood, oh, this is me. This is the real me. I'm no longer going out there or over there or looking for confirmation. I am presently experiencing myself at home with myself. It's very different. So many healers and teachers aren't doing that. They make a mess in their schools and their classes and in their life when we don't know what's ours and not ours. So the synchronicity method really helps to differentiate yourself so you can really tune the inner voice. And it takes practice, but not as much as you would think. People are having full awakenings after a month, 2 months, 3 months of practicing. I have one client who had 8 years of deep depression, and after 21 days of the synchronicity method, and now we're like 4 months in, she hasn't had one day of depression. It's powerful when you reformat yourself, and it only takes 10 minutes a day. It's not like you don't need to do what I did and spend 5 years, 8 hours a day in meditation and not talk or touch people.
You create a shortcut, or at least a framework. I think that's what we're coming back to, the framework. There's just so much there. But ultimately, the framework is quite simple. And it's something that intuitively, some of us been doing always. And it's just like, to be in this body, you got to ground yourself. And you ground yourself to Mother Earth, because we chose to be in this realm with her. And she is going through her process, and I talk about that all the time. She's a teenager on her journey, and we are in symbiotic, beautiful relationship with her, also growing and evolving on the soul level. But we can be in all these realms, right? And having all these experiences, but unless we choose to be here in this realm, sometimes I love to say at the end of my sessions, it's like you pinch yourself and say, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm in this body, I'm in this heart. Yes, for sure. And the electromagnetics of the heart is something that the Heart Coherence Institute talks about. It's like everything comes back through the toroidal field back into the heart. It's the portal to everything. So I think it totally makes sense, like that. If you're anchored, you embodied, then you can go on a journey where you're fully sovereign and aware and in control.
Yeah, and what I realized from all the schools I went to, because they teach so many techniques, I learned all the spiritual arts from
Mhm.
school, but I already had a full awakening and an entire lifetime of paranormal encounters and mind blowing experiences. And then I went and studied it from all these masters, and nobody was teaching that. Nobody's teaching base. They're teaching protection and psychic martial arts in ways that didn't work for what my soul was here to deal with. Like I was dealing with a level of differentiation, let's call it darkness, that was way beyond what people in my school, my teachers, even want to speak about or let alone had experience with. It was a very lonely time for me. The spiritual warriorship was life or death situations, and that formed me. And I realized it is so simple. And even though people read my method and they're like, oh, I do that. Oh, no, you say that, but I can see if you're doing it or not. Like it is an actual, literal, anatomical thing. And someone who can see the field can tell if you're in your frame or not. And I can tell
Mhm.
you most people think that they are, and they're not. And all I need to do is go up and test it for a second and I'll show you. There's feedback loop that I do in my school. And so it's so simple, nobody wants to do it. And it's just really interesting. And it really only takes 10 minutes. It's a muscle. So your body knows how to do it because it is your biology. This muscle is totally atrophied because you've been so conditioned to not do it. Let's just take grounding, for example. So many people talk about grounding. It means something different for different people. Some people, it means walking on the grass barefoot. That's a great way to ground, but
Mhm.
that's more of an electrical grounding and connecting to the earth's energy. And it's great. You're getting electrical currents and you're stabilizing the electricity in your body and discharging. Very nourishing. Totally do it. But doesn't mean you're grounded if you do that. Like I can see they're not grounded. Or some people, they just put roots in and they're just going a few inches deep or a few feet deep. True grounding, when you're here to really do, if your soul mission and your light is here to be really bright, your grounding needs to be into the center of the earth.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you will be thrown off because the
Absolutely.
unseen forces, one small gust of wind, like we need to be unshakable in our embodiment. And that is another level of grounding that most schools don't teach. And I see it over and over again, and wherever I go, or people skip through it when they're leading a practice or they're about to do something. And the energies on the planet right now are so huge, so
Yeah.
strong. And the grounding needs to be huge into the center of the
Absolutely. The
earth.
anchoring is super important. Anything I lead, it's just like naturally every time it's been about drop into the core of the Mother Earth and staying there for a bit too. Any light language transmission that I ever do or I teach others to activate is all through first we ground to the core and then we can bring in the codes in, because if you're not here, if you're not in your body, then you don't even know what you're interacting with while you opening a transmission. And you want to be the pure channel, you want to be the hollow bone, but a hollow bone that's actually in this realm, because there's a reason why you've been doing this transmission to begin with. Some of it is for the collective, some of it is for personal, but a lot of it is actually for the mother. It's really for her, it's for Gaia. She needs this frequency too. So I always see myself, maybe this image will help some people. The one hand is towards the ground and the other one is towards the sky. And I love that because you and I pulled a card before and it was called Realm Bridger. And I think that pretty much summarized so well what we're trying to talk about. We are the bridge. We are the bridge between these dimensions and realms in this particular body. And there's a responsibility that we carry with being the bridge. And so anyone who is on this path or is awakening to this path needs to be the bridge. So that means full embodiment here first, and then pulling in the frequencies from the other realms.
Absolutely. Yeah. So key. I'm so happy to do that. And anyone, especially with light language, with channeling your ancient selves from these different
Yeah.
realms, we need really strong, firm grounding in order to anchor it to this world. It's beautifully said. Yeah.
I have a question for you because we started talking a little bit about geometry. I had this conversation with Danielle Lipton because we talked about ascension process in the previous season, and we did touch about Merkaba. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective in terms of the geometry and how needed is the activation of the Merkaba. So I want to hear your perspective because I have my thoughts, of course.
Yeah, I remember when we met the first time, and I was so happy that you guys know how to do that. The Merkaba is more of an advanced practice. I would say don't activate the Merkaba until you've fully framed your orb and you know how to stay in the center of it. Although the Merkaba, once activated, does allow you, it creates a force field that keeps you in the center. So I don't know if you can actually activate a Merkaba without having your field formed. I haven't met someone who's been able to do that yet, but the Merkaba is your mothership. It's what allows you to astral travel and travel in realms beyond time and space. It has the potential to help to bilocate the physical body as well. It's a more advanced practice. I see people know how to do it when they have Egyptian, Atlantean kind of
Mhm.
roots. Maybe your listeners are more advanced in that way and they're already doing it. But primarily on the day to day, just take inventory. Like we have to clean our orb. Our orb has a spiritual hygiene that only takes a couple minutes once you've understood it, but it's so critical to our well-being and to what we're emanating and what we're creating in the world.
I think those orbs that some people catch on the camera, those are essentially those traveling vehicles of other beings from other dimensions. That's what we perceive, and that's how they're able to come here, just as we able to travel as well. I feel Merkaba, anyone who's listening and been following, I think they're resonating with the soul communication podcast because they are, in one way or another, on the initiatic path. They are resonating with the fact that this is, on the soul level, something that's familiar for them. Maybe not everyone is courageous enough to do all the practices yet or fully step into it, but the soul is resonated because it knows this is what we used to do in the past. I feel in this lifetime, everyone needs to activate their Merkaba or come at least to that place when they're ready for it, when they anchored the geometry and they framed it and they comfortable and done all the trauma clearing work to activate a Merkaba. In my understanding, the process is organic. The facilitator can hold the frequency of activation, but ultimately the soul needs to be ready to activate it because it's not going to happen otherwise. And I agree with you. I think the orb needs to be stable and framed first before that can happen.
Yeah. I don't think we an ability to decide what initiation we get next. So some people listening, like you and myself also, were probably initiated at very high levels before we were ready, like before we understood what was happening to us. And then you have to go back and we only understand it like in retrospect, the state of the world and where we're at. These spontaneous awakenings are happening more and more quickly because we're at a kind of crisis juncture where you're needed to be fully online and contribute to the solutions that are needed at this moment. And so if your Merkaba is blasting you off, like good luck trying to control it. Like it's just going to take you where you need to go. And I would say if it's causing disorientation and things like that. Make sure you're grounding really deeply and just coming back to the simple orb presencing practice. My method is the foundation for all spiritual arts. I know that it will enhance your abilities and your other practices and will anchor your soul and your body and make you that much more effective. Yeah, thanks for having me
Thank
on,
you,
Deanna.
Ian. This was so amazing. What's the website?
The synchronicitybook.com. You can find the book there and learn more about me. It's also on Audible for those who prefer to listen than read. And knowtheself.com is my mystery school. Got some new things coming up soon, so you'll want to subscribe to my newsletter. I'm on a world synchronicity tour at the moment, lots of live events, workshops, retreats, and going to be inviting people into the council. So anyone who's already online and having a lot of experiences, please reach out. We're forming some powerful councils to deal with issues like bringing down the templates for what's ailing humanity at the moment. So if you'd like to know more about that, send me a message.
Beautiful. Thank you, sister, for all your work across the world. And your Synchronicity Tour, I think, is bringing all these light codes. And you and I met completely in very synchronistic way.
I know we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, it pretty much defines the word synchronicity, because not only I met Ian, but also Ken Harris, who's coming on this podcast in the next few episodes, and he also wrote the book Synchronicity. So I'm having two synchronicity authors in most synchronistic ways, and it's beautiful because that means there's resonance. That means that you had to hear this message, and the work we'll be doing together, activating the grid and the new earth template that we all moving towards. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ian. And continue to tune in for more episodes in season 2. Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to see our other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe.